Tiffany, you want to lead us out?
Oh, sure. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for participating in Jersey Waterworks' final session of the conference, Putting Lead Service Lines in New Jersey's Rearview Mirror. We're happy to have you join us, and we have some exciting panelists for you today, and we hope that you leave here with some good information and resources on how to help your community put lead lines in their rearview mirror. We hope that if you've participated in any of the other sessions during the conference, you enjoyed them as well, and that you came away from that from this conference as a whole feeling empowered with valuable information and an idea for next steps for your community. As I mentioned, this session is about putting lead lines in our rearview mirror. As you know, lead lines are a topic of discussion across the country, and with this new infrastructure bill that is making market investment into infrastructure improvement, we believe that this session will be helpful in providing you with some useful information on what other communities such as Newark has done and what it is you can do to help your community as well. Also, be on the lookout for our Jersey Waterworks scavenger hunt question, which will be in the chat towards the end of the session. With that being said, I'd like to begin with introductions. I'm the moderator for this session. My name is Tiffany Stewart. I'm an attorney, and I was the assistant director for the Department of Water and Sewer Utilities for the city of Newark and co-chair for Jersey Waterworks Lead and Drinking Water Task Force. I'll now turn it over for our next speaker to introduce herself. Trish.
Thanks, Tiffany. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Trish Angelido. I am the director of the Division of Water Supply and Geoscience at New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. So underneath our program is the Safe Drinking Water Program, which includes implementing lead service line replacement requirements.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Fury, owner and president of Agri-Environmental and Laboratory Services. We're an NJDEP certified water testing laboratory, and I'm also a board W3 water treatment license operator. And I been in the business for about 30 years, and member of the American Waterworks Association, and an active member of the Lead and Drinking Water Task Force.
Good afternoon, everyone. Don Shields, VP of Engineering for New Jersey American Water, the largest investor-owned utility in the state, and happy to be here today to talk about our activities with lead service line removal.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for those introductions. We're going to get started with the session. As many of you may know, Newark was one of the first cities to sort of go through this process, having identified back in about 2018, I believe, that we needed to replace lead service lines across the city and, you know, throughout our distribution system in general. So I wanted to touch on some things that I thought would be important and useful information for other communities who are either starting their lead service line replacement programs or are already going through the process. The first thing that I wanted to touch on is staying on time and within budget. I think, as many people may know, our program started out as a 10-year program that had 8 phases, and we were using money from the iBank to facilitate the cost of that. One of the things that we learned, many people may not know that the first phase of that program that started was actually a pilot. And during that pilot phase, what we did was, you know, we sort of took away lessons learned and figured out, you know, how we could make things more expedient and cost effective moving forward. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are as a result of what happened during that pilot phase in phase 1 and the things that we implemented from that moving forward. So one of the big things was legislation. So what we learned during that first pilot phase was that, first of all, we couldn't use public money on private property. So that was hurdle number one that had to be overcame. With that being said, we had to work diligently with the mayor, worked diligently with our NORC, our Essex delegation, and local and state level legislators to help enact legislation that would allow for us to use public money on private funds, on private properties, excuse me. So that was a big thing that came from that, and was actually, something that not only benefited Newark, but will benefit people across the state as well. After that was done, we codified it in our own ordinances, our city ordinances, as well as made some additional requirements, one of which being that in order to convey a property, if you were selling your property, you had to verify that there were no lead service lines. And if there were, that you had to replace them before the conveyance took place. Part of the reason that we did this was because, even though our program initially was supposed to take 10 years, and then we got it down to about, 3 years, a little under 3 years. We wanted to ensure that anyone who couldn't wait for their property to be on the schedule, because this program started a couple of years ago, if they were not scheduled to have their lead service lines replaced until 2021, and they were selling their property in, let's say, 2020, that they didn't move forward without making sure that that lead service line was replaced. Another thing that also came from our pilot was initially we had $1,000 homeowner contribution that was part of that program. And it was a voluntary program as well, which meant that homeowners needed to first opt into the program. They had to sign up and provide information. And then depending on what phase they were in and how much money was being associated with the replacement of their specific lead service line, they could be charged up to $1,000. Any kind of price tag on work that was being done was proving to be challenging, mostly because with Newark at least, most of our population, about 75%, is are renters. So they're not the homeowners. They're not the ones, actually, the tenants are the ones who are actually occupying the home and are affected by the drinking water. The homeowners are not. And so, to have a price tag that's associated with that was a hurdle that we had to overcome. Luckily, we were able to secure some funding and do some creative things that allowed us to eliminate that cost share component to the homeowners. What it also allowed us to do is make the program mandatory instead of a voluntary opt-in program. Having the program be a mandatory program as opposed to a voluntary opt-in program also allowed us to condense the work that was being provided to contractors. So rather than having crews deployed in various different parts of the city and having to mobilize, demobilize, and then remobilize again, which was inflating costs as well, we were able to just put them in one neighborhood and say, hey, you're going to knock out these 50 houses on this block. It allowed for, like I said, us to get more competitive pricing when it came to putting out the bids. And then it also allowed us to be able to get the program done at a faster pace. One of the other things that was important in being able to facilitate getting into those homes was allowing residents to be the ones to sign off on the right of entry form. So rather than requiring that the homeowner do that, because most of them are not there, they could be LLCs, they could be out of the state, out of the country. In order for us to gain access to the property, we need someone who is going to allow us that access. And so what we did is provide an ordinance that allowed the tenant to provide access to the city in order for us to change the lead service lines. Another thing, the second thing that I would like to touch on that I thought was critically important to us being able to not only do these things efficiently, but also to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible. We want to manage these contractors. We want to make sure that the work is getting done, that is being done correctly. We don't want them to fall behind in their projects. And so what we were able to do is, utilize a lot of different technology to do that. One of which was eBuilder. eBuilder, I know a lot of communities use that platform as well, but what it allowed us to do is to see what the contractors were doing in real time. So they not only had requirements that they were bound by pursuant to the contract terms and specifications, which, for example, we would say, after 30 days, after you, have your 30-day period, you have to be meeting 25 replacements per day, meaning not that you were checking 25 homes, but that there were actually 25 replacements happening per day. So eBuilder allowed us to see, when you have various contractors, various different crews out, under various different contracts, that we're able to see in real time what they're doing, if they're meeting their goals, and we're able to address any issues that arise before they become problematic. Before they're, at the point where they're close to the end of their contract and saying, hey, we need a change order because we need additional time. So I found that tool to be invaluable. The other thing that we did in order to rebuild and maintain trust with the community was to provide a website that fed off of that information that was being put into eBuilder and was a forward-facing public database for our residents. So that website is called norcledserviceline.com, and it provides a plethora of information for the residents. So they can go on there, and it's, house specific, it's property specific. So they can type in their address and they will see information regarding whether their lead service line has been replaced, when it was replaced, who the contractor was that it was replaced by, the contract number. If they haven't had their line replaced yet, it'll also provide them with the information of what data we have for them. For example, if we don't have the right of reentry form, it'll let them know that. They'll be able to click on a link and complete the right of reentry form right there online. It also provided information with respect to filter distribution. So it'll tell them the last time that they received a filter cartridge, when they received their filter, the actual point of use filter itself, and so that they can keep up to date about, replacements and things like that. It tells them how many lead service lines we've replaced across the city. It has a nice little map that sort of, provides a visual. All these things are being fed from eBuilder into the system. So, even, for example, if they have their water tested, their testing results, the analysis of that will be available on norcledserviceline.com. So I found that that website is, invaluable when it comes to the residents understanding what we're doing, being confident that we're doing the job correctly, and that, they have just as much information as we do. The other thing, I guess, that, sort of lessons learned and things like that from the pilot program was the contractor performance targets. One of the big takeaways from that was one of the first contractors that we had, initially our contracts were, about a year, like 9 months to a year, I believe. And what we learned is that they're actually able to get that work done a lot faster. So rather than, stretching out a contract 9 months to a year for them to replace 500 lead service lines, we learned that they were actually able to get it done in 90 days. And so we made the adjustments with the contracts moving forward. So that pilot phase was really important in us sort of learning and understanding what the contractors were capable of, and then what we needed to have on our end in order to make that process easier and smoother for them as well. Like, we would obtain as many right of entries as we could, so that when the contract was awarded and they had to ramp up, they already had, a database of right of entry forms that they could start with and, start scheduling houses to, do replacements for. it also, like I said, sort of helped us with timing and things like that. And then also what we took away from, one of the things that we took away from that was starting to do bidding back to back. So we might have a bid opening on Tuesday at 10 o'clock and then have another bid opening at Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And the same contractors are bidding on these contracts. But what that does is then they know, okay, the lowest bidder came in at $6,500,000. And so, if I'm putting in my bid tomorrow, whatever my number was, I need to kind of sharpen my pencil. So it makes it more competitive in terms of pricing, so that you can make sure that you're being financially responsible with the funds that you have available, because we all know that those funds aren't infinite, and we do want to make sure that we're using them to the best of our abilities. We also had learned that test pits, like doing a contract that just had test pits was kind of unnecessary and a waste of money. What we did instead was that we had the test pits built into the contract, and if the house didn't need a replacement, then you were paid out as a test pit. If it did need a replacement, then you're paid out for the replacement, whether that's a partial or a full or whatever. But to do a complete contract with just test pits, we just found that it wasn't the best way to use the funds that we had available. The last thing that I wanted to touch on before I turn it over to Trish is the partnerships that we had with all of our, local, state, and federal agencies, the EPA, the DEP, community organizations, block associations. All those agencies and organizations were pivotal in us getting this done in the time frame that we've been able to get it done. EPA was instrumental in helping us determine where what the breakdown in the corrosion control was specifically. We harvested some pipes, we sent it to EPA, and they looked at it, took a look at it under the microscope, did their analysis, and provided us the information as quickly as possible, because we wanted to make sure that scientifically what we were doing was sound and that we had a scientific basis for how we were moving forward. The DEP has been alongside us every single step of the way, providing guidance, providing support, providing funding initially. So, making sure that you cultivate and maintain those relationships is extremely important. And when it comes to having to have this information disseminated to the public in general, utilizing places like Clean Water Action or block associations, things like that, are invaluable tools to help you get the word out and to help residents understand what you're doing. So those are just some of the lessons learned, and I think helpful information from the things that we've done in our program that have allowed us to move at the pace that we have and almost be done. I think we literally have maybe less than 400 houses to check. So extremely excited about this. Very excited to be crossing this finish line soon, and happy to provide any information or support that anybody may need, as you're going through this process as well. Trish.
Tiffany. Andrea, can you pull up the slides, please? Thanks. Yeah, so what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is a little bit of details on the requirements for lead service line replacement, and specifically the recent lead service line replacement bill and some of those specific requirements for community water systems over the next year. Next slide, please. So the lead service line replacement bill that was signed in July of this year requires all community water systems to replace their lead service lines within the next 10 years. It also, discusses a 10% on average replacement rate per year. There are some considerations when partial replacements may be considered in emergency situations, but those partial replacements cannot count towards the replacement requirement. There are also changes to the lead service line definition. So including galvanized materials in the definition of a lead service line was established here as well. And then there is a piece, and I'm not going to focus on this, but there are components of the law that allows for water systems, both government-owned or investor-owned, to be able to distribute the cost of lead service line replacement across a customer base. And so I'm not going to discuss those specifics today, but that is a component of this as well. Next slide, please. So this goes over an overall timeline and timeframes that are established in the law, starting with the initial count of lead service lines. So the first count of lead service lines was required to be submitted to the department in September of this year. And so we are actively continuing to review those submissions and compile what those submissions look like. And that was a count of lead service lines, unknowns, as well as a number of lead service lines to be replaced annually. And then the January and February requirements, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail in the next few slides. So I'll discuss those at that point. And then at the end of this, at the end of the annual cycle, so a year from when the law was signed, there needs to be an update to the inventory that's submitted in January, and then also annual thereafter updates, and as well as the initial lead service line replacement plan is required to be submitted this July of 2022 as well. And so that that goes through, water systems need to go through and discuss in that plan how they're going to prioritize, how they're going to address any unknowns they may have, how they're going to fund and prioritize sensitive populations. So that was the initial lead service line plan. Next slide, please. So the January inventory and how that's different than what was required in September. So in January, water systems are required to submit a complete inventory. So the September was a form that looked at the number of lead service lines. This is an inventory that's going to look at all materials in the distribution system and include locational information. So lead, copper, galvanized, plastic, and location of that service line. Also requires water systems to make that inventory publicly available on their website, although there is some consideration for water systems that serve less than 3,300 people that do not have a website, that they just need to make it publicly available. And then the department is working on an update to the Drinking Water Watch application, which makes publicly available various data and information related to water systems. And so the summary data will be available through Drinking Water Watch. Next slide, please. And then following that initial inventory, so once the inventory is developed, it's made publicly available on the website. There's also written notification that's required to those customers and non-paying customers of a lead service line. And so that's an important piece. And even when you're hearing Tiffany speak, the fact that if you may have an off-site property owner, so that person needs to be notified, but additionally, the water system also has to notify the person that's in that residence. So maybe the non-paying consumer. So there's an important requirement there that both parties need to be notified if there's a lead service line. And then there's some requirements in that notice, which includes what's the service line comprised of, what are the health effects of lead, what steps customers can take to reduce their exposure. There's also a requirement that if a municipality that the community water system serves has more than 10% of their population that speaks a language other than English, that the notice needs to be translated as well. And so that deadline is required. Yep, you can go to the next slide. Thanks, Andreas. That deadline would be February. So it's 30 days from when the water system submits their inventory to the department. And then, so that brings you to the February deadline. And then this slide just goes over some additional legislation related to lead service lines. And some of which, Tiffany was talking about the importance of some of these legislations and how it can allow and support water systems in doing the work that they need to do. And you can see the list here. And then the last two, although not really focused on lead service lines specifically, but related to lead in drinking water, some notification requirements when there's an action level exceedance for a water system, and also additional customer request sampling. So if a water system has an action level exceedance, or if they complete a partial lead service line replacement, that there's a requirement that they would provide customer sampling to those that requested it at no cost to the customer. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to get into a little bit of funding at high level. And I'm sure over the past few days, there's been probably a lot of discussion about some of these pieces. But so currently, there is funding available through the department's Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And projects are ranked based on priority. And you can see here on the slide, it gives the different packages that are available for lead service line replacement projects. There is a cap for principal forgiveness based on the number of lead service lines that a system might have. We give priority points to systems that have lead service line, to the lead service line projects, as well as systems that have an action level exceedance. And then you see there's some additional principal forgiveness packages for small systems. And then the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which are estimating approximately $1 billion in the next 5 years for New Jersey's both drinking water and clean water programs. And a component of that funding is specifically focused on lead service lines, and estimating somewhere around $245 million over the next 5 years. And again, the allocation of those funds would be established through the intended use plan. That's the way in which the department puts out publicly what the priorities are and how priorities are done for funding. And so we're anticipating putting out the intended use plan in January, and there's an opportunity for public comment on that plan as well. And that would identify how this additional funding would be allocated. And lead service lines is just one of the focuses of that infrastructure deal. Next slide, please. And then my last two slides, I'm just going to go over briefly just the status of the lead and copper rule revisions, both at the federal level and here at New Jersey. So EPA proposed a revised lead and copper rule that is to become effective next week, December 16th of this year. But that rule was put into regulatory review. And so over 2021 and the summer of 2021, EPA did a series of engagements, stakeholder engagements with communities, as well as engaging co-regulators such as the department to do a review of the LCRR. And so on December 16th, there's really a few possible pathways that could go with the LCRR. EPA could withdraw with no revisions, they could modify, or it could move forward and be effective on December 16th. So we're keeping an eye on the status of that at the federal level. Next slide, please. And then finally, just New Jersey, we continue to move forward. The department continues to move forward with the New Jersey specific revisions to the lead and copper rule, and incorporating a lot of these requirements that have come through the legislation. And this slide just goes through a summary of what our past stakeholder engagements have been, and if you're interested in really details on what those presentations are, you can go to that link there, and it gives you the presentations at the that we've done at our various stakeholder meetings. And so we're continuing to move forward with that rulemaking. New Jersey does have to consider what's happening at the federal level as well, because we cannot implement anything that's less stringent than EPA. So continuing, as I said, to kind of follow the path of the LCRR, and and hope to move forward with a proposal next year. And then there would be a 60-day comment period and public hearing and adoption after that. And so our proposal is, includes a lot of these requirements for the lead service line replacement, but also focuses on strengthening and improving some other requirements in the lead and copper rule, including corrosion control treatment, public education and outreach, things related to consecutive system consideration. So, and as I said, that link there can take you to some of our past presentations if you're interested in hearing more about that. And that's really all I have. So I don't think we're taking questions. I think we're probably going to take questions at the end, Tiffany, on the panel. So that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Yes, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the panel. So we'll move to Mike Fury, who's going to be talking about lead service line implementation from the utility viewpoint.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Again, my name is Mike Fury. I am the president and owner of Agri-Environmental and Lab Services. And in my previous life, I spent 12 years at the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission, and left there after 12 years and started this company. So when I left the company, or left the commission, I started working with, from as small as homeowners that need help, all the way up to large water systems, the city of Trenton. And in 2018, like Tiffany said, I was intimately involved in 2018 with the city of Newark, working with them on various projects that were related to lead in drinking water. So what I'm going to be talking about is, in my short time, is some of the utility perspectives, some of the challenges that are out there for utilities, whether it's an investor-owned utility or a publicly owned utility. They all have the same challenges. This lead and copper rule has been in effect for many years. The previous emphasis was always on corrosion control, and to optimize corrosion control. That was the challenge for all water systems. And with the when in fact you couldn't meet the lead action levels, then you had to switch over to and then focus on lead service line replacements. Obviously, that has changed over the years. There's been a lot of study and research. I want to point everybody to a very good American Water Works Research Foundation EPA paper that was written a few years ago, the contribution of service lines and plumbing fixtures to lead and copper rule compliance issues. It really kind of quantified the impacts of where this lead's coming from. That report, as a summary, just estimated about 50 to 75% of all lead was coming from lead service lines. The remainder of the lead concentrations that you would find in water samples were really focused on premise plumbing. So there's the challenge of lead service lines, and there's a challenge of premise plumbing. I've been teaching lead corrosion and corrosion control for many years at Rutgers. It's very difficult to understand. It is an art form. It's very difficult for water systems to maintain. But there are a lot of challenges. So one of the main challenges from a utility perspective is, and I want to talk about, because I am a water treatment license operator, the challenges of a licensed operator. These licensed operators operate water systems, no matter if they're small water systems, the medium-sized, the large ones. It's very challenging. As an operator, you got to know a lot about everything. So I think one of the challenges is going to be for as these new lead and copper rules come out, and looking at lead service line replacement, is the ability for operators to meet these challenges. They have a lot of responsibilities, and this is just going to be another challenge for them to look at and to be concerned with. They operate every aspect of the system, whether it's a large system, a small system. But we have found over the years, and I really wanted to emphasize, and most of my work for the last 20 years has been working with small to medium-sized water systems. And those are where the challenges are, and the reasons why there's so many challenges for these small to medium-sized systems. A, there's a lack of funding, and then B, there's a lack of technical resources. So this is where the Lead and Drinking Water Task Force came in. I've been a member of that task force since the inception. One of the interesting and as in some of the challenges, and as operators are facing, they got to be looking at things that, somewhat outside the box, that are not normally within the regulatory frameworks. Things like sequential testing to really determine where that lead source is coming from. There's going to be new possible requirements. Instead of first draw lead samples, there's going to be possibly fifth draw lead samples. That's going to be a challenge for an operator. There's also, and I know Tiffany talked about it before, they did a lot of pipe analysis. Well, that's not normally a part of any operator's vernacular. So that's something that, when as they start removing these lead service lines, they're going to hopefully they'll do some lead pipe analysis. There's also pipe loop testing, pilot testing. There's so many different ways to determine how to optimize your corrosion control. So those are real challenges. And for a small to medium sized system, the real challenge is, like as I said, is the technical resources, is finding the right people to help. And then the other challenge is the enormous challenge is going to be where to find the money in order to fund this. One of the things that came out of the law, and I know Tiffany mentioned it and Trish mentioned it, is the definition of a lead service line, and they're including galvanized plumbing. That is going to have a significant impact on small to medium sized systems. Where before they were only concerned with lead service lines, now they're going to have to examine and find out in their system where those galvanized piping is. So a water system that can be lead free, not many sites that have lead issues, will have to be challenged by finding galvanized piping and identify some also additional lead sources. So that's going to be an enormous challenge. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and it's been most of my time, is talk about the Lead Drinking Water Task Force has formed a new Jersey Water Works lead service line replacement implementation work group. It was formed by, it came out of the Lead and Drinking Water Task Force. I am the chair of that group, and Rich Calby from Ridgewood Water is also the co-chair. We're putting a group of individuals together in order to work on that group, and some of the things that we're going to be looking at, and this is to assist these small to medium sized systems to implement this very tight time frame of 10 years to replace lead service lines, and it is going to be an enormous challenge. So one of the things that we're looking to do is solicit advice from experts, and these people that are going to be on the group are going to be experts. They're going to be experts that have been working on this for a number of years. They're going to analyze potential options on key issues. They're going to develop and share practices and resources, and they're going to draft recommendations for consideration by local governments and water systems. So that's going to be an enormous challenge for the group. And one of the things we like to focus on, and I do have to give credit to Kareem Adeem, and I've been talking to him about this for a long time, is the city of Newark did an incredibly good job with lead service line replacement. And one of the things that he's always recommended, and I've always supported it, is to put together this group and to with the focus on possibly putting a collaborative together to go out there, pre-qualify engineering consultants that have expertise in lead service line replacement, to pre-qualify contractors who have a lot of experience with lead service line replacement, and to tap into that resource. Whether it's pre-qualifying these companies in order to do this type of work, to give these small to medium-sized water systems access to that valuable information, because those are the ones that already have experience and they could probably benefit from those resources. So one of the like I said, one of the challenges for any small to medium water system, especially if they have lead action level exceedances or copper for that matter, how to deal with returning the system back to compliance, and then at the same time going out into their water system and finding out where these lead service lines, galvanized lines, gooseneck lead water pipes, where they are, and then to try to, sorry about that. That does happen, right? People trying to get a hold of me. So very popular. So that's going to be the challenge for any water system, especially for the small to medium sized system. I think that I really do got to give a lot of credit to Jersey Water Works and New Jersey Future. They put together a great team and a great organization that really can help. And they've partnered with New Jersey DEP. We have New Jersey American, a lot of groups that are available, and a lot of people that are resources that'll be available for these small to medium sized water systems. So that is the challenge that these systems face. We're going to try our best, and we're going to actually kick off our first meeting in December. I can imagine, this is going to go on for a long time. And hopefully we'll try to get, if anybody's interested in that group, and they want to learn more about it, you can reach out to me and contact me. I'll be glad to share, where we're at with the group, and what we're trying to accomplish. And I think the biggest challenge for these is going to be, and I've heard this already because I do represent a lot of small to medium sized water systems, and the question I hear constantly is, where are we going to get the money to do this? And that is very challenging for them, and where to get that technical resource, and hopefully they can get this with this group. So that's all I have today. I want to thank everybody for letting me speak, and I'll be available for questions afterwards.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Our next speaker is going to be Don Shields, who's going to talk about best practices.
Thanks, Stephanie. And thanks, Mike. We're just happy to be part of the collaborative for sure. I'm going to take a few minutes. I know I'm going to try and leave some time at the end here, and also for Shirelle, so we can get customer questions as well. So just a quick hello and happy holidays to everybody. Just a shout out to Trish and Tiffany and Mike and everybody on the panel. Just some great comments. I'm not going to repeat a lot of it. There was a question that did come up in the chat. I think it was from Ray about galvanized lines, and that's a key issue that I'm going to talk a little bit about. If you go to the next slide, just real brief. We do serve about 33% roughly of all the folks in the state of New Jersey. Thanks to all our customers out there. We do really appreciate it. If you go ahead to the next slide. Again, I'm going to try and get through this pretty quick because I definitely want to leave time for questions. And part of this was, where are you? Where are you going? What do you have? Do you have good maps, maintenance records? Do you have details of all of your building applications? Have you taken customer surveys? Where did you have exceedances? Have you pinpointed that? And have you used GIS or some sort of mapping program to basically determine where are you? These are the two areas of concern that we hit first, was Hillside on the left and also Linden. If you go ahead and click the next. And what's our goal? Let's get there. Let's get from the main into the house. And then what do you have? And this is just a representative example of what the service line installation consists of. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, so it's a mishmash. It's a little bit of, if you kind of go clockwise around, I'll start to the left. This is the map that we have on our website right now. And this indicates from our central service area, where do we have our lead service lines based on the information that we had. We looked at over 700,000 tap records. So that was a Herculean effort. We give a lot of thanks to the students at Rowan and HopeWorks in Camden. We work with them. And there's a giving back to the community aspect where they were able to help us identify and understand what our records look like. So good news is, Mike talked about this, is compliance with lead and copper rule. New Jersey American's been in compliance for a long time because we have a lot of resources to be able to dedicate to our operations to make sure that we're meeting our water quality parameters, and we have the appropriate resources to make sure that those that lead is not an issue for us. And I know it's a challenge. It's a major challenge, and our operators take great pride in making sure that we meet those parameters day in, day out. So having said all that, after we found out all the records that we had in our system, just taking a look at them and making sure that we understand where things are. Basically looking at, okay, well, we're going to hit Hillside, we're going to hit Irvington, we're going to hit this central system, and so you start putting a plan together. So where do you think they are? And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see kind of a map that says this is where we're going to look, and these are the details of the properties, et cetera, et cetera. Much like what Tiffany said before, you got to know where you're going, what's your plan. The top right corner is a little bit of a unique method for us where we've actually utilized, it's a downhole camera that goes into, uses vacuum excavation. So what it does is basically blows the soil out and you're able to suck it out with a vacuum. And the little arrows there indicate both customer side and company side. And in all honesty, what we found is some of our records were just not that good. we thought we had lead in lead. And in this instance, in that top corner there, you'll see on that left picture shows copper on both sides. Okay, fill the hole back up, indicate that on your records, and move on to the next one. And the one to the right of that, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. We're not sure. We think that's copper, and then galvanized on the right, on the customer side. So again, our records indicated lead and lead. In this instance, again, the records need to be updated. So this is part of the issue that you're going to have to deal with, is not only using new technology to see what you have out there, but also making sure you're upgrading your records. So if you go to all the way to the bottom left, you'll see pictures of, these are actual full excavations of the areas, some areas in Hillside where you have galvanized. And these records are now linked to that bottom picture that you see on the right. Go ahead and click the next slide there, Andrew. This is our database, very similar to what Tiffany mentioned in the e-builder. I love the fact that you use an e-builder. We're moving in that direction as well. But this is a dashboard now that says, well, what do you have? Where is it? How have you tackled your issues? And then what's next? So go ahead and hit the next one there. So this is a finished product. So this is after you go out. This is after you've done all your analysis. This is post construction installation. We've fixed the lead service line. We've upgraded the meter pit in this instance and made sure that this customer now has the safe, reliable, adequate, proper copper service line that gets into this house. So look, we all agree that lead has to get out, and our job is to make sure that we understand exactly where this stuff is. How many of them are we going to get after? And in this instance, in Hillside and Linden, and in this central area, we had roughly about 1,500 we think we're going to get after. Having said all that, we probably hit about half of those that we thought we actually confirmed what we had with some of this test bit work that we did. The other piece that we're doing is, as we get all this information, it gets into GIS. We're actually running a machine learning algorithm, or AI, artificial intelligence. And what that's doing is it's saying, okay, here's what you knew, here's what you found, and then now we're going to start to apply that knowledge to, well, what do you think you have? What might you not know? And then that will help us go into areas where we think we have some real challenges. So I'm going to cut it a little bit short. And if you go ahead to the last slide there, because again, I want to be mindful of questions, and I want to be sure we get to Shirelle as well. So with that, I'm going to stop. And we're going to turn it over to Shirelle.
Don, you didn't have to do that on my account. Oh, that was so interesting, because we see a lot of that on the ground, where we have the grounds looking like that, where they're changing in the street, but they're not changing in the home because the material are two different lines. Well, hello everyone. I'm Shirelle Snyder with the East Trenton Collaborative. I'm a community organizer, and I am so happy to be working with New Jersey Futures, Jersey Waterworks, OWLS. There are so many organizations out there that's doing this work. And because of these other organizations, I've gotten involved, and we're on the ground doing the work with the residents, getting other residents involved. So I do know every year over 3,500 children in the state of New Jersey are found to have elevated blood lead levels above the federal standard level, and it's time to change that. So the East Trenton Collaborative is working with OWLS and Lead Free New Jersey, New Jersey Futures, Jersey Waterworks to get the word out there to the residents that lead is bad business, and we need to get the lead out of Trenton. So we have a lot of canvassing going on that we do. We've also had a lead task force listening session, where we also got the mayor of Trenton to come on to that listening session, and the residents talk about things that they did not know about lead. Like, for one thing, so what? We have lead, Shirelle. You take some water from the faucet that has lead because those lines have, it's a lead service line. You put it on the pot, you put it in the pot, you put it on the stove, you boil it. Okay, so that gets the lead out. So a lot of residents were surprised to know that lead does not boil out. If anything, it's attaching itself to your pots and pans. There's a lot of stories with children in schools at the tender age of 2 that have elevated blood levels. So what we're doing, East Trenton Collaborative, as well as the other organizations that I mentioned, are trying to get the lead out and trying to get the residents to advocate for what's happening in their own cities with these high lead levels. I mean, lead is in our water. There's high lead levels in Trenton with the soil, and there's high lead levels in the paint because the homes are so old. So we've made a lead packet. You made a lead packet folder. We go to some of the residents, we knock on doors, we give them this folder, and we ask them, do you know about the dangers of lead? Have you come in contact? And surprisingly, we're getting a lot of feedback. Oh, you know what? My 2-year-old has tested with elevated blood levels at the age of 2. And then they don't know what to do after that. So in these packets that we're giving out to the residents, we are putting information in them. So one of the packets, in the packets, we have something with ILS. ILS has this great weatherization program. They'll come in, they do lead testing. So in this folder, there's a way to get in contact with ILS who will come out, test the lead in their home for paint, water, or soil. There's also in this packet application to pay for your lead service lines to be replaced. So we want all the lead service lines replaced here in Trenton, but there's a customer cost for the private side. So we have an application that we give to not all the Trenton residents, which we want to expand, but right now we have for the East Trenton residents where we'll help pay for those costs of the $1,000 to have your service lines replaced. So that's just some of the ways we're getting the information out to the residents. There's so much more, but Don was so gracious to get over to me. I want to give back to everyone else and give some time for the people on this call to ask questions. And I love listening to all of you, and thank you. Thank you for even allowing me to be here and speak.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And thank you to all of our presenters who have done a wonderful job at providing information for all the participants in this session. I want to open up the floor to questions at this time. I know that I was just looking at the chat. I want to make sure we don't miss anything, but I know there was a question about how are galvanized water lines treated / categorized under lead service line removal. I'll let Trish answer that question more fully. I know that Don had touched on it as well, but I just want to make sure people get the information.
Thanks, Tiffany. Yeah, so under the new lead service line replacement law, galvanized lines are now considered lead service lines for the purposes of replacement. So in those counts and in those inventories for determining how many lines would need to be replaced by the water system for the 10 years, that would include galvanized lines as well.
And Trish, just to add to that, I'm sure Michael and Tiffany will add to it. What you're going to find out there is lead goosenecks with galvanized. That seems to be the biggest, probably the biggest challenge that a lot of water utilities are going to face is that. So just to add.
Yeah. And I could add to that too, Don and Trish, you can have galvanized piping and then internally it could be lined on the inside of galvanized with lead. And that was a I think that was a unique challenge that was down in Trenton, and they have a real challenge that way, and that's very difficult to evaluate. It's hard you don't have X-ray vision, so in some cases you're gonna have to cut the piping out and then possibly do pipe analysis and look at it more closely. But I can tell you the other I want to add to the galvanized, when the small to medium sized systems, when we shared that information to these, whether it's small or medium, when we said something about when the definition of changed to galvanized piping, that was a game changer, because a lot of these systems don't really have lead service lines, but they do have galvanized, and so that changed a lot, and that is going to be an enormous challenge for any small to medium sized water system.
Absolutely.
There is another question in the Q&A chat, which says, based on NORC and national experience, it is clear that the technical knowledge to do lead service line replacement is available, but are enough trained contractors available to replicate what NORC did statewide? If not, how can we avoid price hikes and delays due to inadequate labor pool and competition? So I'll start answering, and then, if any of the panelists have any other information they'd like to provide to the attendees, that would be great. I know in NORC specifically, we've had a number of contractors, bid on these contracts, and they actually, have done work, in other parts of the state as well as in other states. So I do think that there is a pretty healthy pool available of contractors who are able and ready to do the work. One of the things that I had mentioned earlier in my presentation with respect to how to avoid delays and price hikes is to, one of the things that NORC did anyway, with respect to delays, is to make sure that you have expectations laid out in the specifications for what your contractor is expected to do as far as production on a daily basis. It helps to do it on a daily basis, because even NORC has run into problems where we've had to have meetings with contractors to help get them back on track, figure out where the bottlenecks were, where they needed support in order to meet those daily production requirements. The other thing that we did, like I said, was to have the bidding process for multiple phases, maybe phase 1A, 1B, 1C, have all of those phases back to back. What it did is, allowed contractors to sort of see where others were coming in and to sharpen their pencils and make sure that they're making sure that they're coming back with a competitive bid. That's important because, like I said, our resources are limited, and we want to make sure that we're being financially responsible. So having those back-to-back bidding sessions was one of the things that we found helpful. But I do think that, there is a healthy pool of contractors who are available to do the work. I think one of the places that we may run into issues is that everybody may be trying to do the same work at the same time. And I'm not sure how to get around that other than to try to get your program up and running sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so to add to that, Tiffany, one of the main focuses of the workshop group that we're putting together is to pre-qualify contractors, look at funding issues, see if we can pool resources and make it cost effective for these small to medium sized systems that have limited funds. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There are limited amount of money in all these, whether it's a private organization, investor owned, or whether it's a public agency, they have to spend their money wisely. And so one of the goals is to find these resources and then work with the state revolving fund possibly, and to get funding sources that are at a reasonable rate where they can take advantage. They can take advantage of those resources and at a cost-effective manner. So that is a main goal. That's one of the huge goal that we're going to have as a workshop group, and hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, the other thing that I just wanted to add, because Mike is right. I just want to piggyback on that a little bit and just I'm hoping that this will be something that will help with the availability of contractors in the future. One of the things that NORC did is have apprenticeship programs built into their contracts. That sort of helped, revitalize, reboost, expand the workforce that was available and ready to do this work. So if more communities do things like that when they're getting their programs started, then that actually helps to expand the number of workers and crews and things like that the contractors have available to perform the replacements.
Yeah, Tiffany, that's a great point. We have an opportunity here to really work with organized labor and others out there to train people within the communities as well to work with these contractors. We've got a boatload of contractors out there, but you're right, they are going to be competing for some more work. But we've also got an opportunity. We just recently graduated a number of folks through a Water Up program from Camden. And then now we will be hiring them in our teams, but also offering them up for contractors to say, hey, look, they live in the communities that are affected by this. So let's get them engaged and let's train a workforce to get after this because it's huge. So anyway,
Yeah.
do we have time for more questions? Can we think we can keep going?
Yeah, we have other questions, and so we have a question for Trish. Does DEP plan to put forth a standard format for the initial service line inventory and the written correspondence that water utilities must send to property homeowners 30 days later?
Yes, so we're currently updating, the existing inventory form that water utilities are used to utilizing for lead service line inventory. So we're actively updating that, and we'll put that out and guidance associated with how to complete that form and then what certification might be needed. And then as far as correspondence, yes, we're developing templates that will ensure that it included any of the required language that water systems can utilize for that correspondence, and hoping to get that guidance out pretty shortly.
The other question that came up is, can the speakers talk about whether or how more cities and towns can eliminate the cost share and require lead service line replacement like NORC did? What are the obstacles? That is a complicated question. And one that I won't fully be able to answer, but I will tell you what I know. We ended up using going through the county and using their AAA bond to help us secure funds. We already had a revenue source that was going to offset the debt repayment for the debt service for the lead service line program. However, there were stipulations that, we couldn't have any sort of tax increase as a result, any sort of increase in water rates as a result. It was a very complicated process that I think would probably be, better handled by, if you're a municipality or a township, your business administrator or your city administrator. Those are things that they would work through with your financial advisors and sort of, working with the local finance board to get those things straightened out. But it was not an easy process, even though we had an alternate revenue source to offset the debt service that would be, associated with the lead service line program. That wasn't the end all be all. There were other factors and considerations that needed to be addressed before we could eliminate the cost share for the homeowner. Does anyone else have any input?
I can add to that just from the investor-owned utility standpoint. There is a provision in the legislation that does allow for cost recovery of the customer sideline. And I hate to say it in this way, but we are the Walmart of water companies, so we do get the economies of scale. And the benefit to communities that have the issue is that other parts of the New Jersey American Water, the larger New Jersey American Water system, are going to help pay for that. Now that means all customers are going to pay for it, and it does mean that there is a rate impact, but it is minimal when you consider it's spread over 650,000 customers. So that's the advantage of having a larger customer base. Doesn't help the small ones, doesn't help the medium ones. There is still the challenge of those towns that have that may be smaller and may have this, But I think what you did in Newark and having that legislative ability to say, look, we're gonna see if we can spread this out at least over the customer base in Newark or the customer base in that town, so everybody shares in the benefits for the entire town. Just our IOU perspective.
Yeah, and then to add to that on the public utility side, where if there's townships or towns that are between 10 and 30,000 people, these are considered medium-sized systems. The ability to share that cost or over that all those ratepayers there's going to be an impact, and I hate to say, but it is going to impact the rates. And that's the common theme I hear back from these type of water systems is like how are we going to pay for it and how are we going to stay in compliance? I mean, they realize that they obviously they want to get the lead out, and that's the end goal. But there's how are we going to tap into the financial resources? And believe it or not, a lot of them are not even aware of these funding sources. So you have to make them aware of the funding sources where the larger systems are aware of that, and then they to get them involved with the funding sources to get the money to do the job. That's a challenge. So it's going to be a challenge for everybody.
And Mike, on the iBank funding side, there is the principal forgiveness piece. And what
Right.
we're doing is applying that as much as we can to the to the customer side. Customer side tends to be longer. It tends to be more has more cost to it. So as much money as we can get from the iBank and state revolving funds and from the federal government, we'll apply that to customer sidelines
Right.
as much as we can.
Right. Yeah. Debt forgiveness, and obviously the more challenged the system is, there's more debt forgiveness. And to convince somebody to say, well, you may be able to get this money, and it may be considered maybe a grant, and they're like, well, what are the strings attached? And they somehow they seem doubtful on how that's the way to go. So that is going to be the challenge, and to get that money to those systems is going to be difficult. And I agree with Don. There are enormous challenges, but you do have to make it affordable, and you have to do it correct, and you have 10 years to do it.
Okay, so just moving on to the next question. This is for Don. Does NJAW plan to use predictive modeling based on the age of the housing stock to make an educated guess on where lead service lines may be in a community?
Yeah, thanks for the softball, Gary. that's a resounding yes. That's one piece of the puzzle. Predictive modeling takes as much information as we know about the property, when it was built, how it was built, property records, all of that goes into that predictive modeling. So short answer is yes.
Got it. For Don and Pat, I think they mean Trish. DEP recently created a new GIS mapping tool, preliminary lead exposure mapping. Everyone enjoyed hearing about this at a recent regional virtual meeting, but the consensus among the group was whether or not this program would include any identified or replaced lead service lines in New Jersey.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that's the NJDEP DOH collaborative mapping tool that's being discussed here. And so, I mean, the department is looking at all different types of data sources. And I think even at the meeting, it was discussed soils and water as additional components and how to do that, in the future. So we are considering that. And then also, we're developing some additional tools to be able to bring in some of this data from water systems in different ways as we move forward this requirement over the next 10 years, to be able to get that information in for these requirements, as well as any future requirements related to the revisions that we're seeing at the federal level. So we are developing some additional tools to be able to manage data a little bit differently than we currently do. And we'll absolutely consider when applicable and if able to, additional sources for that mapping tool.
Yeah, and Trish, I'll just add to that because I think Matt's next question was about how to focus outreach and education programs. You heard me talk a little bit about data, tells you where to go, and then it tells you how to focus on that area, and that gets to the customer communication piece. Here's the map. Here's what lead service lines look like. Here's what here's what happens with lead in the water. Here's what you can do about it in the interim. Here's when we're going to come out. So that, and I don't mean to, minimize, but that's absolutely 100% why you want to map out and get as much data as you can, so that when we do have those conversations with the customer, here's the door hanger, here's the letter, here's everything that you need to know about it. Here's all the stuff that you've done, Tiffany and Newark, Shirelle, the stuff that you're doing here in in and around Trenton. If we don't get all that stuff right, the communication piece starts to fall apart, because I don't know. Well, why are you here? Well, here's why. So it's really important that data is as accurate as you possibly can get it, so that you can get the communication right.
Thank you both for that. So our next question is, as many water utilities go to market to comply with the 10-year lead service line replacement goal, could contracts in neighboring towns be bundled or cooperatively purchased in some way to ensure the best price?
Yeah.
Mike, you want to go? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's actually one of, if I go back, and I hate to sound and repeat myself, but that is one of the goals of the workshop group, is to look at that opportunity where you can work together in collectively in areas, and Rich Calby is on that group, and he's the Village of Ridgewood, but there's a lot of surrounding communities that could benefit from their expertise, and I think that's the goal, is to offer that type of arrangement where towns can tap into a resource and benefit from something that somebody already did, somebody already figured it out. People in the water industry do talk together, and that's what we want to try to do, and get them to talk to other towns and give them that resource. So that is the goal.
Yeah, just to add to that too, I think it's, from an investor-owned standpoint, with bigger systems that we have, our towns are contiguous, and you have those concentrated spots. We have framework contracts with multiple contractors where we list out all the pricing, and we can say, hey, look, we've got, here's 500 service lines in this particular township, go after them. There's 1,000 over here, go after them. Oh, and by the way, when we do our main replacement projects, we know those areas where we have online cast iron and galvanized, lead goosenecks, all that. Go do those projects and do all that work together, so you get that economy of scale and you get that best pricing.
Right.
And Tiffany said it too. You're bundling projects together and saying, give me the best price that you can. So I think the short answer to that is yes, you could bundle. The question is how do you do it on the public side? Are there state contracts available? Do you start thinking about that? Do you do community? Do you do county collaboratives? Are there other ways that
Right.
people can get the resources together to tackle?
Excellent points. The next question is actually for Shirelle. Could you briefly review why it is critical to use trusted local community organizations to help convey the dangers of lead to local residents, to make sure that communication is most effective?
On the ground, we're right there with the community, working with them every day. So they trust our voices. So we can be out there with the community, letting them know that we have these other orgs that can help as well, to get the word out, what's going on with the lead service lines, or with lead in their soil, or with lead in their homes with the paint, and how there's other organizations out there we can connect it to. So with the trusted voice in the community, now we have the residents, we have the other orgs, we're the middlemen, and we're bringing them together. They have the issue, they have a solution, and we can work out this problem. So what we don't have is a lot of community centers in and around Trenton. So maybe thinking areas may need more, so they can be the trusted voices to bring the resources that the residents need out in the communities.
Yeah, I have to just echo with what Shirelle said as well, because at Newark, what we found is that it helps to, like she said, it helps to have them as a partner. One, because the community trusts them, but two, it reinforces the message that you're trying to send out to the residents. So as long as you're, regularly meeting with these organizations and you guys are on the same page and, speaking the same language and conveying the same message, it's just reinforcing that, especially when you may have other organizations out there that you haven't partnered with, or maybe the media or something like that, that's conveying a very different message. You need as many people as possible, sort of drowning out all the misinformation that may be going around. And you need people that the community trusts to be reinforcing the accurate information and so that residents are equipped with the knowledge of what's going on and how they can, be involved and help move things along. So for Trish, what challenges do you foresee attached to EPA's lead and copper rule requirement to perform the 5th liter sampling in addition to tap sampling?
Yeah, and I'm sure panelists here have their own thoughts on that as well. But yeah, so EPA's, the LCRR requires both the first draw sample as well as the 5th liter sample. And that 5th liter sample is targeted to try and get to the lead service line. So to get at the, not just that first draw sample, which might be indicative of what you're seeing in internal plumbing, but also at the service line. And so, one of the things that we have heard are some challenges. Now, Michigan has implemented a similar, in their state, additional requirements for that first draw and a lead service line sample. And, customer participation. I know that we hear often from water systems that they can struggle with getting customer participation in their lead and copper sampling pool. And so whether or not that additional sample and that additional, might hinder people from participating in the sampling program. And I think that's also another area for outreach is, how important it is that residents or, that are in the sampling pool to participate in that compliance sampling. And that's the basis of a lot of our, our compliance determinations and maybe some additional outreach associated with, what that sampling means. I don't know. I'm sure others might have thoughts on what they think might be other challenges as well.
Well, I agree with you, Trish. It's an enormous challenge to get a first draw sample, and to also get a 5th draw sample. That's going to be absolutely an enormous challenge. But I do agree, if you educate the customers and bring them in and try to communicate well the reasons why you're doing that, while building up trust and the reasons why we're doing it and what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, there is obviously a science behind it. Like you said, first draw versus 5th draw. You're trying to, in the first draw, you're trying to determine if it's coming from the fixtures, and then the 5th draw is, whether the lead is coming from the lead service line, and to try to communicate that to the customer it's enormously challenging, and as well as getting these participants and to get them involved. And so, if you do a good job of educating them, I think you can get past that challenge, but it is going to be a challenge for any water system.
Yeah, you have enough challenge just to get the current lead and copper sampling stuff done. And trying to, again, it's about the communication with the customer. Do you understand why this is important? Do you understand why it costs so much? I mean, look, this is the only utility we all ingest, right? So let's start there, and if we can get people to just get that right out of the gates, I think most people do get it, but it's around the cost that comes along with it, and there's no free lunch here, right? How do we as an industry say this is the most important thing? We talk a lot about the electric charging stations and some of the clean energy and some of the other stuff. If we just had that much focus on clean water and the issues around clean water and lead, imagine how much more we could do. And that, I don't mean to be on my soapbox, but it's so important that it boggles my mind. We have a lot of conversations about some of this other stuff, but when it comes to this, people are really, they're just, well, I don't know. No, this is way too important. We have to get this stuff right. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Good point.
Okay, another question for Shirelle. What are the best ways to reach residents? Door knocking, flyers, events?
Well, I know one of the way we reached a lot of customers when the lead task force, we had a session. We wanted to have it where everyone can come to the session. There was a listen and learn where the residents was there and they can talk to other organizations and county officials, but we couldn't do it in person, but it still happened virtually. So we got all the people together. We had a big turnout. So virtual messaging is good. Knocking on doors is awesome. I mean, because you're right there. You're with the person. You're getting to know one another, and you hear the stories. This is really happening. People are being affected by lead, and our children are the ones that's really suffering. There's so much that this lead does with the body. They're learning, and they're just not putting it together. So, like Don got all spiritual kind of. It's a big deal. So door knocking, flyers, virtual events. The summertime is coming. The summertime. So in the summertime, we have a lot of residents. Residents love to gather together. So I'm thinking East Trenton Collaborative performs every month an open streets event. On our open streets events, it's a way we started this so people can come out because of COVID, come out the house, do some exercise, meet with other folks. But maybe one way is at these summer events, have a big stage. We have stage where we have performers come on. That's fine and everything. Now we have a stage where we have a platform like we're doing right now where people come out and they talk about, a resident can talk about how let-ups affect them. We have organizations come out and talk about why we need our service lines changed. So maybe that might be a really big way to music, school, gatherings, and preach about what lead is doing to our water, our soil, and the lead paint in our homes is doing to our children. So I think that's another way.
I would come out. I would definitely.
Just to piggyback a little bit off what Shirelle said, in Newark, we used every medium possible to get information out. I mean, we have almost 300,000 residents. We didn't want there to be anyone who didn't know what was going on, what we were asking them to do, how they could help move our efforts along. So we would put things in water bills. We would send out mailers. We would have people do door knocking. And that's also where the community organizations played a huge role. We would partner with them and they would help us do door knocking. We had community meetings. Pre-COVID, they were in person, and we had, translators also present so that, we were reaching all different, everybody, every language in the city that we could. And then when COVID hit, we went virtual, and we would have them at different times. Sometimes they would be lunchtime, sometimes they would be in the evening. And this is so that, people who work 9 to 5, if they can't make those meetings, we're also having one in the evening that they can make. Our mayor does a state of the city address. And he actually, said, hey, we need to do a state of the water. So we started having a state of the water for the whole city that's held at NJPAC, and where, he would do an address just on water. Where are we with the water? What are the updates that we've done? And not just with respect to lead, but although that's been a huge topic of discussion in those past state of the waters, but what we're doing across the utility in general. But I would say, use every medium that you possibly can. Social media is a big thing as well, but because you just want to make sure that there's no resident that hasn't been touched by the information you're trying to put out there. I think we had one more question for Don. As a private company, you will need the local municipalities to pass ordinances ensuring access to the customer side lead service line. Is this going to be a problem, or is legislation needed to address this?
Great question, Dan. We have, since we've embarked on our side or on the lead service line replacement program, Hillside, Irvington, and other areas where we're looking at, we've come up with a customer release, and showed folks, hey, look, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. We'd like you to release. If you do not want us to access your property, you can tell us that you do not, and that will go on our customer property record, indicating that you've refused. By and large, I think 99.9% of the folks that we've talked to have said, we're good, please come in and go ahead and replace that service line. So it's a very good question. I don't have a perfect answer for you. Legislation might be needed, but based on our experience so far, it hasn't been a real issue for us.
Yeah, I could just add to that is local ordinances might need to be written and addressed on a town level, and that may be a difficult challenge. But again, just to get, I know Newark did an outstanding job of moving that forward, and as a model to get it done. And then that's going to be a challenge on a town level, is to somehow get that because you don't. One of the things you want to avoid is partial lead service line replacements. You want to do full lead service line replacements. So in order to gain that customer access, it's going to be you may have to have ordinances written to get that access.
And Mike, generally speaking, with the customer education, when we're talking to them and having the conversations, it is about that. They get that issue. They understand that it is you don't want to do partials. And I know this group has talked about, the lead task force and others have talked about, if you can't get it at a municipal or local level, could you do something statewide?
Right.
That might be another opportunity, another way to do full state legislation.
Exactly.
Anyone is interested in a copy of that legislation, I think it's available on norcleadserviceline.com if you're interested. From Chris Sturm, we have, if you think that the state of New Jersey should direct some of its funding from the American Rescue Plan to communities to replace lead pipes, please consider signing the attached letter. Deadline is now Monday, close of business, and she's provided a link here in the chat for anyone who's interested in signing that letter. So are there any other questions before we close out? Okay, if not, I just want to thank everyone for participating in this session and in the Jersey Waterworks Conference. And thank you to all of our panelists. I hope that you found this information helpful. I want to encourage everyone to become a member of Jersey Waterworks. You can receive our newsletters or join a committee. The information for that is posted right here on this slide. Additionally, as a reminder, like I said earlier, there is a scavenger hunt that's meant to introduce people to New Jersey Water Check. By participating in that scavenger hunt, you do become eligible to receive a $25 gift card. The question for the scavenger hunt will be in the chat box. I just want to make sure. Okay. Yeah, it looks like it is in the chat box. Okay. So again, thank you for participating in the conference, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.